What if the reason you cannot rest is not because your mind is broken, but because it has been carrying stories that were never allowed to become quiet? Tonight, you do not have to solve your whole life. You do not have to understand every mistake, fix every relationship, or predict what tomorrow may bring. You do not have to win an argument that already ended or replay a conversation that happened months ago. You only have to be here for this one small moment, because perhaps your heart has been working too hard for too long. Maybe you climbed into bed hoping that sleep would arrive like an old friend, but instead your thoughts opened 100 different doors. One memory led to another. One worry invited 10 more. One simple question became a maze with no ending. Perhaps someone you miss appeared in your mind again. Perhaps a regret sat quietly beside you. Perhaps the future stood at the edge of the room asking for answers you do not have. If this feels familiar, there is nothing strange about you. There is nothing weak about you. You are simply experiencing something that countless human beings have carried through countless nights. Ancient Buddhist teachings often remind us that the mind is a wonderful servant, but a difficult master. It was never meant to run without rest, yet many of us have trained it to believe that constant thinking is the same as safety. We imagine that if we think long enough, we can protect ourselves from pain. If we remember every detail, we will never be hurt again. If we prepare for every possibility, life will finally become predictable. But maybe you have already discovered that the opposite often happens. The harder you chase peace, the farther peace seems to move away. The more tightly you hold on to certainty, the more uncertain everything feels. There is an old image from Zen that speaks gently to this struggle. Imagine holding a cup of clear water in your hands. At first, the water is still, and you can see all the way to the bottom. Then you begin to shake the cup because you want the water to become calm. You shake it harder because the movement refuses to stop. Soon the water becomes cloudy, and you can no longer see through it at all. The problem was never the water. The problem was believing that constant movement could create stillness. Your mind may be very much like that cup tonight. It does not need to be forced into silence. It may only need permission to stop being shaken. Perhaps you have spent years carrying invisible weight, the expectations of others, the expectations you placed on yourself, the fear that you are behind in life, the quiet belief that everyone else understands something that you somehow missed. You may smile during the day and appear strong, but when the lights grow soft and the world becomes quiet, your own thoughts return asking to be heard. Instead of fighting them tonight, maybe we can sit beside them with kindness. Buddhist wisdom does not ask you to hate your thoughts. It does not ask you to become someone who never worries. It simply offers another way to look at what is happening inside you. It gently suggests that you are not every thought that passes through your awareness. Just as clouds travel across the sky without becoming the sky itself, thoughts travel across the mind without becoming the deepest truth of who you are. There is a part of you that has been present through every season of your life. It was there when you were a child discovering the world. It was there during moments of joy and moments of loss. It watched friendships begin and end. It watched dreams appear and change. It noticed sadness, excitement, loneliness, hope, and love. That quiet awareness has always been there, patiently waiting beneath the noise. Tonight you do not need to search for it somewhere far away. You do not need to climb a mountain or sit in an ancient temple. You do not need perfect meditation skills. You do not even need to stop thinking. You only need to notice that something inside you is aware that thinking is happening. That awareness is already peaceful, even when the thoughts themselves are not. Maybe you have carried the idea that you must earn rest. Perhaps you tell yourself that you can relax after one more project, one more paycheck, one more apology, one more achievement, one more answer. Yet life has a quiet way of creating another mountain just as soon as we reach the top of the last one. If rest always belongs to tomorrow, then tomorrow becomes a place we never truly arrive. Buddhist teachings often return us to a simple truth. This breath is enough for this breath. This moment is enough for this moment. You are allowed to be unfinished and still be worthy of peace. You are allowed to have questions and still deserve sleep. You are allowed to carry sadness and still experience comfort. There may be old memories that still knock on the door of your heart. There may be people you could not keep, words you wish had been different, roads you never traveled. You do not have to throw those memories away. You do not have to pretend they never mattered. You can let them sit quietly like old photographs resting on a shelf. They do not have to become the house you live in. Tonight, as you breathe, perhaps you can imagine setting one small burden beside your bed. Not forever. You do not have to promise never to think about it again. Only for this moment. Only for the length of a quiet breath. Let your shoulders soften. Let your jaw rest. Let your hands become still. Feel the simple support beneath you. Notice that the earth has been holding you every day of your life without asking anything in return. In the same way, this moment can hold you without demanding that you become someone else. And as the night grows deeper, you may begin to discover that peace is not something you create through effort. It is something that quietly appears when, for a little while, you stop asking your heart to carry more than it was ever meant to hold. There is another quiet truth that many people discover only after years of exhaustion. The deepest tiredness does not always come from work, responsibility, or the passing of time. Sometimes it comes from arguing with life itself. A small part of the heart keeps whispering that the past should have been different, that people should have behaved differently, that the future should already be clear, and that we should somehow be stronger than we feel. Without realizing it, we begin carrying an invisible conversation every day. We explain ourselves to people who are not in the room. We defend our choices to voices that only exist in memory. We imagine perfect endings for moments that have already passed. We rewrite old stories again and again, hoping that one of them will finally remove the ache we still carry. But tonight, perhaps you can notice how heavy that work has become. Perhaps you can feel how much energy it takes to resist what has already happened. There is an old Zen image of a traveler walking beside a river. The traveler finds a smooth stone and decides to carry it because it might become useful one day. A few miles later, another beautiful stone appears, and then another. Each one seems too valuable to leave behind. At first, the weight is hardly noticeable. The traveler continues with confidence, believing that careful preparation is wisdom. But as the sun begins to set, every step becomes slower. The shoulders grow tense. The back begins to ache. The traveler wonders why the journey has become so difficult, forgetting that the road itself was never the burden. The burden was everything that was picked up along the way. Many of our thoughts are like those stones, a disappointment from years ago, a harsh sentence someone once spoke, a mistake we cannot forgive ourselves for making, a future event we have imagined 1,000 different ways. None of these things are happening in this moment, and yet they sit quietly inside the mind asking to be carried everywhere we go. Buddhist teachings often invite us to ask a gentle question. Is this thought helping me walk, or is it another stone in my hands? This is not a question meant to create guilt. It is not another task to complete perfectly. It is simply an invitation to become curious. You may notice that some worries return every night. They wear different faces, but they tell the same story. What if I fail? What if I lose what I love? What if I am not enough? What if I missed my chance? The mind believes that repeating these questions will eventually create certainty, yet certainty rarely arrives. Instead, the questions become habits, and habits slowly become rooms we forget we are allowed to leave. There is a reason ancient teachers spoke so often about awareness. Awareness is different from struggle. Struggle says that every difficult thought must be defeated. Awareness quietly says that every difficult thought can be noticed. Imagine sitting beside a peaceful lake just before sunrise. Leaves drift across the surface of the water. You do not jump into the lake to chase every leaf. You simply watch them arrive and watch them continue on their way. Thoughts can be approached with the same kindness. A memory appears. You notice it. A fear appears. You notice it. A regret appears. You notice it. You do not have to build a home for each one. You do not have to invite each one to stay through the night. Perhaps this sounds too simple because the mind has spent so many years believing that effort is the answer to everything. We admire people who push harder, work longer, and refuse to give up. Those qualities have their place in life. But there are moments when trying harder only tightens the knot. Have you ever fallen asleep by deciding with all your strength that you must sleep immediately? Most people discover that sleep arrives when they stop chasing it. Peace often follows the same quiet path. It visits when the door is left open. It slips into the room when the struggle grows softer. This does not mean becoming careless. It does not mean giving up on your dreams or pretending that pain does not matter. It means understanding that there is a difference between carrying responsibility and carrying unnecessary suffering. You can care deeply without holding on so tightly that your own heart cannot breathe. You can love people without demanding that they become exactly who you expected them to be. You can remember the past without asking it to change. You can prepare for tomorrow without living there before it arrives. Maybe there is one thought that keeps returning to you tonight. You do not need to force it away. You do not need to judge yourself because it came back again. Simply look at it with gentle honesty. Ask yourself if it is asking for attention or if it is asking for endless repetition. Some thoughts are teachers. They show us a wound that still needs compassion. Other thoughts are only echoes. They repeat because repetition has become familiar. Wisdom is not found by hating either one. Wisdom grows by learning the difference. There is a quiet place inside you that has never been damaged by the noise of the mind. It has watched every season come and go. It has survived every disappointment and every uncertainty. It is the same quiet awareness that noticed your first breath this evening and that notices these words now. Ancient teachings often point toward that silent place because it does not need to become peaceful. It already is. The clouds may cover the moon, but they never remove it from the sky. Thoughts may cover the heart, but they do not erase the deeper stillness beneath them. Tonight, you may not be able to put down every stone you have carried. You may not solve every question that has followed you through the years. You do not have to. Perhaps one stone is enough. One old argument, one regret, one fear about tomorrow. For the next few quiet moments, you can let it rest beside the path and discover that the journey was never asking you to carry everything at once. As the night becomes quieter, you may begin to notice something that is easy to miss during the busy hours of the day. Many of the thoughts that return to you are not truly asking to be solved. They are asking to be understood. There is an important difference between those two things. The mind often believes that every feeling must have an answer and every question must have a conclusion. It believes that if it searches long enough, one final idea will appear and everything inside will finally become calm. Yet perhaps you have already lived long enough to know that some of the greatest worries never disappear because they were never created by a lack of information. They were created by a longing to feel safe, accepted, loved, and whole. Buddhist teachings often describe this longing in a very gentle way. They speak of attachment not as a punishment and not as a flaw, but as the natural habit of a heart that is afraid to lose what it treasures. We become attached to people because they make us feel understood. We become attached to dreams because they promise a better future. We become attached to old memories because they remind us of who we once were. We even become attached to our worries because they create the feeling that we are preparing for life. The strange part is that the mind can become attached not only to happiness, but also to sadness. It can hold on to disappointment because disappointment has become familiar. It can return to regret because regret feels like unfinished business. It can repeat old conversations because it secretly hopes that one day the ending will change. There is no need to judge yourself if you recognize this. Almost every human heart has done the same thing. Imagine a child walking along the shore collecting seashells. Some are beautiful, some are cracked. Some have lost their color after years in the water. The child does not know which ones are valuable and which ones are not, so every shell goes into the bag. At first, the collection feels exciting. After a while, the bag becomes heavy, but the child continues because letting go feels impossible. Many adults carry their inner world in much the same way. We keep compliments and criticism together. We keep victories and embarrassments together. We keep love and loss together. We keep every version of ourselves inside one crowded bag and then wonder why the journey feels so difficult. Ancient wisdom gently asks another question. Must every shell be carried forever? This question can feel uncomfortable because the mind quickly answers that letting go means forgetting. Yet letting go and forgetting are not the same path. You can remember someone with gratitude without carrying the pain of losing them every day. You can remember a mistake without turning it into your identity. You can remember a dream that never happened without deciding that your life failed. The memory may remain, but the weight slowly changes. This is why many Buddhist teachers speak about observing instead of holding. When you hold a bird too tightly, both you and the bird suffer. When you open your hand, the bird may stay for a while or it may fly away, but your hand is no longer trapped. Thoughts are often like that bird. The harder we squeeze them, the more restless they become. The softer our attention becomes, the easier it is to see their true nature. Some stay for a moment and leave. Some return from time to time. None of them remain exactly the same. This is the quiet lesson of impermanence. Everything changes, even the things that insist they never will. The feeling that troubles you tonight is already changing as you listen. The memory that once felt unbearable has already become different from what it was years ago. The person you were 10 years ago is not the person who is breathing these words now. Your cells have changed. Your understanding has changed. Your hopes have changed. The seasons outside your window have changed over and over again. Life has been teaching impermanence every single day, but the mind often closes its eyes because change can feel frightening. It would rather hold tightly to something familiar than trust the movement of the unknown. Yet there is another way to see this. If everything changes, then the moments of heaviness also change. If everything changes, then the nights of loneliness change. If everything changes, then fear itself cannot build a permanent home inside you. Even the storm eventually becomes rain, and even the rain eventually becomes clear sky. Perhaps there is one memory that still visits you often. You may have asked yourself why it keeps returning. Maybe the memory is not asking you to relive it. Maybe it is asking you to offer compassion to the person you were when it happened. Many people look back at earlier versions of themselves with criticism. They think they should have known more, understood more, acted differently, spoken differently, loved differently. But the person you were in that moment only knew what that moment allowed. The younger version of you was walking through life with the understanding available at the time. To judge that person by the wisdom you gained years later is like judging the first light of dawn, because it is not yet noon. Compassion begins when we allow our past selves to be human. Compassion begins when we stop demanding perfection from a life that was always meant to be a journey of learning. Tonight, you may not have all the answers your mind keeps requesting. You may not understand every loss or every change. You may not know exactly where your path will lead next year or even next month. Yet perhaps peace does not require complete certainty. Perhaps peace begins when you quietly admit that it is all right to walk without seeing the entire road. A traveler crossing a forest at night does not need the light to reach the horizon. The traveler only needs enough light to take the next step. In the same way, your heart may not need the solution to every future problem. It may only need permission to rest in this one breath, in this one quiet moment, carrying a little less than it carried before. There is a quiet story that has been told for generations because it speaks to something hidden inside almost every human heart. Long ago, a traveler walked through the hills searching for a wise old monk who was said to understand the secret of a peaceful life. The traveler had spent many years collecting knowledge. He had read books, listened to teachers, and crossed great distances hoping that one more lesson would finally quiet the endless movement of his mind. Yet every night he still carried the same worries to bed. He worried about the years he had lost. He worried about the years that were still to come. He worried about people who had forgotten him and about people he could not forget. He worried that perhaps he had already missed the life he was supposed to live. When he finally reached the small monastery, he expected to find a grand temple filled with answers. Instead, he found an old monk sitting beneath a tree, watching the evening light touch the leaves. The traveler bowed and asked the question he had carried for so long. He said that his thoughts never stopped. He said that he was tired of carrying memories and fears. He asked how he could make his mind become quiet. The old monk smiled but did not answer. He stood slowly and invited the traveler to walk with him. They followed a narrow path until they reached a small stream. The water moved gently over smooth stones, making a soft sound that filled the evening air. The monk pointed to the stream and asked what he saw. The traveler answered that he saw water flowing toward a distant river. The monk nodded and picked up a dry leaf from the ground. Without saying a word, he placed the leaf on the surface of the water. The traveler watched as the leaf drifted away without effort. It did not fight the current. It did not ask where it was going. It simply moved with the stream until it disappeared around a bend. The monk turned and asked a simple question. He asked why human beings trust the river more than they trust life itself. The traveler did not understand. The monk explained that the leaf remained light because it did not try to control the water. It did not demand that the current move faster or slower. It did not cling to the stone it had already passed, and it did not fear the bend that had not yet arrived. It simply allowed itself to be carried. Then the monk picked up another leaf and pressed it beneath the water with a small stick. The leaf resisted. It shook and twisted under the surface until the stick was removed. The moment the pressure disappeared, the leaf floated peacefully again. The monk looked at the traveler and said that many people spend their whole lives pressing their own hearts beneath the surface. They hold themselves under the weight of old regrets. They push themselves down with impossible expectations. They believe they must control every outcome, protect themselves from every disappointment, and solve every mystery before they deserve to rest. Yet the struggle itself becomes the source of their suffering. The traveler sat beside the stream for a long time. He realized that he had treated every thought like an emergency. A memory arrived and he chased it. A fear appeared and he believed it. A doubt entered his mind and he built a home around it. He had forgotten that thoughts, like leaves, have their own nature. They appear, they drift, they change, they leave. The old monk picked up a small stone and placed it in the traveler's hand. He asked him to hold it tightly. After a few moments, the traveler's hand became tense. After a little longer, his arm began to ache. The monk asked whether the stone had become heavier. The traveler said that it had not, but it certainly felt heavier. The monk smiled again and said that many burdens are exactly like that. The problem is not always the existence of the stone. The problem is believing that it must be held every moment of the day. Sometimes wisdom is not found by throwing the stone away. Sometimes wisdom is simply opening the hand. The traveler looked at the stone for a while and then placed it gently on the ground. Nothing dramatic happened. The sky did not change. The mountains did not move. The stream continued its quiet journey. Yet something inside him became lighter because he finally understood that carrying and caring were not the same thing. He could care about people without carrying every sorrow they had ever caused. He could care about his future without carrying every fear about what might happen. He could care about his own life without carrying the belief that he had to become perfect. The old monk then told him that the human mind often acts like a guest who has forgotten that it was invited only for dinner and decides to stay forever. Every worry enters politely, asking only for a little attention. But when we feed it with endless arguments and endless imagination, it grows comfortable and refuses to leave. The gentle practice is not to hate the guest. The gentle practice is to remember that the house belongs to awareness, not to worry. The traveler remained at the monastery until the stars appeared above the hills. He listened to the stream and watched the leaves drift through the darkness. For the first time in many years, he stopped asking where every current would lead. He stopped asking whether every choice had been right. He stopped asking whether every memory should have been different. He simply sat beside the water and allowed the night to exist exactly as it was. Perhaps that old story has survived because it is also your story and mine. Perhaps there is a stream flowing quietly beneath all the noise of our lives. Perhaps there are leaves we have tried too hard to hold and stones we have forgotten we can put down. And perhaps the deepest wisdom is not hidden in some distant place, but waiting in the simple discovery that the heart becomes lighter whenever it stops pushing against the current and remembers that even the longest journey is walked one peaceful step at a time. The old traveler returned to the place beside the stream before the first light of morning. The world was quiet in the way that only the earliest hours can be quiet. The stars were beginning to fade, and a cool breeze moved gently through the trees. The old monk was already there, sitting without hurry, watching the water continue the journey it had been making long before either of them had arrived. The traveler sat down beside him, and for a long time neither of them spoke. At last the traveler admitted that although his heart felt lighter than before, one question still remained. He said that he understood the idea of putting down stones and allowing leaves to drift away, but he did not know how to stop becoming trapped inside his own thoughts. The old monk reached toward the stream and touched the surface of the water with one finger. Small circles spread across the current and slowly disappeared. Then he asked the traveler a question that seemed almost too simple. He asked, "Who is it that notices the thought?" The traveler was confused. He answered that he noticed the thought because it was happening inside his own mind. The monk smiled softly and asked again, "If you can notice a thought, then can you truly be the thought itself?" The traveler remained silent because he had never looked at his experience in that way. He had always believed that every fear was part of him, that every memory defined him, and that every worry was a reflection of who he really was. The old monk picked up a smooth piece of wood that had drifted onto the shore. He held it in front of the traveler and said that if someone holds a lantern in the darkness, the lantern allows many things to be seen. It may reveal a flower, a stone, a path, or the face of a friend. Yet the lantern never becomes any of those things. It simply shines upon them. In the same way, awareness shines upon happiness and sadness, excitement and fear, hope and disappointment. But awareness itself is not trapped by any of them. The traveler listened carefully because these words reached a place inside him that had always been tired. He realized that he had spent years introducing himself to the world through passing weather. On happy days, he believed he was happiness. On lonely days, he believed he was loneliness. On anxious nights, he believed he was anxiety itself. He had forgotten that the sky remains the sky whether clouds gather or drift away. Buddhist wisdom often invites us to discover that quiet sky within ourselves. This does not mean becoming cold or distant. It does not mean pretending that emotions do not matter. The sky never fights the storm, and yet the storm cannot stay forever. The heart can learn the same gentle lesson. Feelings may arrive with great strength, but they are visitors. Thoughts may speak loudly, but they are travelers. There is no need to build a permanent home for everything that passes through the mind. The old monk then asked the traveler to close his eyes for a moment and simply listen. The traveler heard the stream moving over the rocks. He heard the wind touching the branches. He heard birds waking somewhere in the distance. Then the monk asked him to notice the sound of his own breathing. The traveler followed the slow movement of each breath without trying to change it. After a few quiet moments, the monk asked whether the sounds had disappeared. The traveler answered that they had not. The stream still flowed. The wind still moved. The birds still sang. The monk nodded and explained that peace does not require the world to become silent. Peace often begins when we stop demanding silence from everything around us. The same truth can be carried into the mind. Thoughts may continue to appear just as birds continue to sing in the morning. The practice is not to force them away. The practice is to remember that you can hear the birds without becoming the birds, and you can notice thoughts without becoming the thoughts. Many people spend their lives waiting for the day when no difficult emotion will ever return. They imagine that wisdom means a completely empty mind. Yet the old teachers rarely described wisdom in that way. They spoke of a mind that could welcome experience without being carried away by it. They spoke of a heart that could love deeply without being destroyed by change. They spoke of awareness that remained steady even while life continued to move. The traveler opened his eyes and watched another leaf float along the stream. This time he noticed something he had not seen before. The leaf did not travel in a perfectly straight line. Sometimes it turned gently in small circles. Sometimes it touched a stone before the current carried it onward. Sometimes it slowed. Sometimes it moved more quickly. Yet it never stopped being part of the river. The monk quietly said that the human journey is often the same. There will be nights when old memories return. There will be days when uncertainty visits again. There will be moments when the heart feels heavy without knowing exactly why. None of those moments erase the deeper stillness that lives beneath them. They are only small turns in the current. The traveler felt grateful because he finally understood that he did not have to become a different person in order to find peace. He did not have to remove every shadow from his mind. He only had to remember that there was something within him larger than every shadow that appeared. As the first sunlight touched the surface of the stream, the old monk stood and began walking back toward the monastery. The traveler followed, carrying nothing in his hands. For the first time in many years, he was not trying to outrun the past or solve the future. He was simply walking, feeling each step beneath his feet, allowing the quiet awareness within him to shine like a lantern that had been there all along, patiently waiting to remind him that the observer is always greater than the passing thoughts it gently sees. The traveler stayed at the monastery for another day because something inside him had begun to awaken. Yet he also knew that old habits do not disappear simply because a new truth has been heard. As the sun slowly climbed over the distant hills, he walked once again with the old monk along the same narrow path beside the stream. Everything looked familiar, but the traveler noticed that his own mind was already trying to turn yesterday's understanding into another possession. A quiet voice inside him whispered that he must never worry again, that he must always remain calm, that he must hold on to this peaceful feeling before it disappeared. The old monk looked at him with gentle eyes and seemed to understand the struggle without hearing a single word. He bent down and picked up a handful of dry sand. Then he closed his hand around it as tightly as he could. Small grains slipped through his fingers and fell back to the earth. The tighter he squeezed, the more sand escaped. At last he opened his hand completely, and the few grains that remained rested quietly in his palm. The monk asked the traveler which hand had truly held the sand. The traveler answered that the open hand had done so, because the closed hand had only forced everything away. The monk smiled softly and said that the human heart often treats peace in exactly the opposite way. It chases calmness until calmness disappears. It demands certainty until certainty becomes impossible. It tries to control life so completely that life no longer feels alive. Many people believe that suffering comes only from difficult events, but ancient wisdom often suggests something deeper. There is the first experience, and then there is the endless story we build around it. Rain begins to fall, and one person simply notices the rain. Another person worries that the day is ruined. Another remembers every storm from the past. Another fears storms that have not yet arrived. The rain itself remains the same, but every mind creates a different world around it. The traveler thought about the many years he had spent carrying invisible stories. A delayed letter became proof that he was forgotten. One mistake became proof that he was not enough. A season of loneliness became proof that he would always be alone. He realized that the events themselves had often ended quickly, but the stories had continued for months or even years. The old monk stopped beside an ancient tree whose branches stretched quietly across the morning sky. He asked the traveler if the tree looked troubled by the birds that landed upon it. The traveler answered that it did not. Some birds stayed only a moment. Some remained longer. Others flew away before they were even noticed. The tree simply continued to stand where it had always stood. The monk then said that awareness can become like that tree. Thoughts may come like birds. Some are beautiful, some are restless, some sing sweetly, some make harsh sounds, but the tree does not become any of them. It offers a place for them to arrive and a place for them to leave. The traveler felt something soften inside him because he understood that he had been chasing every bird across the sky. Every opinion about himself had become a command. Every fear had become a prediction. Every memory had become a destination. He had forgotten that he could remain rooted while life continued to move around him. The old monk sat beneath the tree and invited the traveler to sit beside him. They listened to the quiet sounds of the morning. The wind moved gently through the leaves. Somewhere far away, water continued its patient journey over stone. The monk asked the traveler to notice every sound without naming it. For a few moments he simply listened. There was no need to decide whether a sound was pleasant or unpleasant. There was no need to hold on to one or push another away. They simply appeared and faded. The monk explained that thoughts can be approached in the same gentle way. A memory comes, notice it. A worry comes, notice it. A hope comes, notice it. There is no need to immediately call any of them your identity. There is no need to argue with them or invite them to stay forever. The traveler then asked what should be done with thoughts that return again and again. The monk looked toward the stream and said that some leaves circle for a while when they reach a quiet pool of water. They appear to remain in the same place, yet even they are slowly moving. The same is true for the heart. Certain feelings return because they are asking for kindness instead of judgment. Some old wounds do not need another argument. They need to be seen with compassion. Some fears do not need to be defeated. They need to be understood. The traveler remembered younger versions of himself that he had treated with great harshness. He remembered moments when he expected perfection from a person who had only been trying to find the way forward. For the first time, he wondered what might happen if he offered himself the same patience he would offer a dear friend. The old monk said that many people wait for permission to rest, not realizing that they have been holding that permission in their own hands all along. They believe they must become wiser before they deserve peace, stronger before they deserve kindness, and more successful before they deserve stillness. Yet the quiet truth is that a weary heart heals most deeply when it stops trying to earn what was always freely given. The sun climbed higher, and light began to fill the valley. The traveler looked at the tree, the stream, and the open sky. Nothing around him seemed to struggle to become what it already was. The tree did not hurry to grow. The water did not hurry to reach the river. The clouds did not hurry to cross the horizon. Everything moved according to its own nature. As he breathed slowly, he realized that perhaps life had never asked him to carry every burden, answer every question, or control every tomorrow. Perhaps life had only been asking him to stand like the tree, to flow like the stream, and to trust that awareness itself was wide enough to hold every passing season without ever losing its quiet center. As the day slowly drifted toward evening, the traveler remained near the ancient tree while the old monk returned to the monastery to tend to simple daily tasks. No lesson had been assigned. No sacred text had been placed in his hands. No difficult practice had been demanded of him. He had only been invited to sit quietly and watch the world as it was. At first this seemed easy, but before long he discovered that silence has a way of revealing the hidden movements of the heart. Sitting beneath the wide branches, he noticed that his thoughts had not disappeared. They arrived one after another, almost as if they had been waiting for this moment. He remembered people he had loved and people he had disappointed. He remembered roads he had taken and roads he had left behind. He remembered kind words that had warmed him and careless words that had stayed with him for years. At first he felt discouraged because he believed he had failed. He thought that after everything the old monk had shared, his mind should have been calm by now. Just then, a gentle wind moved through the valley, and several leaves fell from the tree above him. Some landed on the grass, some landed on the path. One leaf rested quietly on his shoulder. He brushed it away without thinking, and then he smiled because he suddenly understood something small but important. The leaf had touched him, but it had not become part of him. It arrived, stayed for a moment, and continued its journey. Perhaps thoughts were not so different. They could visit without becoming his identity. As the sun lowered, the old monk returned carrying a small clay cup filled with warm tea. He sat beside the traveler and offered him the cup without speaking. They watched the evening light together until the traveler finally confessed that he still felt trapped by certain memories. He said that some moments from the past seemed to have roots too deep to ever let go. The monk listened patiently and then asked if he had ever walked through a forest after a heavy rain. The traveler nodded. The monk asked whether the forest tried to keep the rain forever. The traveler answered that it did not. The water nourished the trees, soaked into the earth, filled the streams, and eventually continued on its way. The monk smiled gently and said that the heart was created with the same quiet wisdom. Experiences arrive to teach, to shape, and to nourish understanding, but they were never meant to become permanent storms. Human beings often suffer because they try to turn passing weather into an endless season. The traveler looked toward the distant hills and realized how many years he had spent protecting old sadness, as if it were something precious. He had believed that releasing pain would somehow erase the importance of what had happened. He thought that if he stopped grieving an old loss, it might seem as though that love had never existed. If he forgave himself for an old mistake, it might appear that the mistake did not matter. The old monk seemed to hear these unspoken fears. He picked up the empty clay cup and held it toward the fading light. He asked the traveler if the cup was useful because of the clay or because of the empty space within it. The traveler thought carefully before answering that without the empty space, the cup could hold nothing. The monk nodded. Then he said that the heart also needs empty places. A heart completely filled with yesterday cannot receive today. A mind crowded with endless regret cannot easily notice the quiet gifts that are already here. Many people fear emptiness because they mistake it for loneliness. Yet there is another kind of emptiness, the kind that allows fresh air into a closed room and sunlight through an open window. It is the emptiness that makes room for peace. The traveller held the clay cup in his own hands and wondered how often he had filled every quiet moment with unnecessary worry. During long walks, he had replayed old conversations. During peaceful evenings, he had imagined future disasters. During moments of simple happiness, he had secretly waited for something to go wrong. He had rarely allowed himself to simply exist. The old monk told him that the mind often believes it must remain busy in order to remain safe. It creates plans for problems that may never come. It invents arguments that may never happen. It rehearses sadness before sadness arrives. Yet life itself continues to unfold one breath at a time. No bird sings tomorrow's song. No flower blooms next month. No river reaches the ocean by worrying about the distance ahead. Nature quietly trusts the next moment to reveal itself. The traveler asked whether human beings could truly live that way. The monk answered that no one does it perfectly, and perfection is not the goal. The goal is simply to remember, again and again, that awareness can return to the present just as a bird returns to its nest at dusk. Each time the mind wanders, there is another chance to come home. There is another breath waiting, another step waiting, another quiet moment waiting. The stars slowly appeared above the valley, and the world seemed softer beneath their light. The traveler realized that nothing around him was asking him to become someone else. The tree did not demand that he be wiser. The stream did not demand that he be stronger. The sky did not demand that he understand every mystery before nightfall. They simply welcomed him exactly as he was. Sitting there with the old monk beside him, he understood that perhaps this had been the lesson hidden inside every story. Peace was not a distant reward waiting at the end of a perfect life. It was a gentle companion that had walked beside him all along, patiently waiting for the moment he stopped running after every fear and finally allowed himself to rest in the quiet space that had always existed within his own heart. That night the traveller could not sleep, not because his heart was troubled as it had been before, but because something gentle had begun to unfold within him. He stepped outside the small monastery and walked toward the stream once more. The moon rested above the valley, and its light touched the water with a quiet silver glow. The old monk was already there, as though he had always known the traveller would come. Neither of them spoke. They simply stood together, listening to the sound of the current moving through the darkness. After a long silence, the monk pointed toward the moon reflected in the water and asked the traveller what he saw. The traveller answered that he saw the moon floating in the stream. The monk smiled and gently touched the water with a branch. The reflection broke into 1,000 shimmering pieces. The traveller watched the image disappear and then slowly return as the surface became still again. The monk asked whether the moon itself had been damaged. The traveller said that it had not. Only the reflection had changed. The old monk nodded and said that many people spend their whole lives protecting reflections while forgetting the moon. They protect opinions about themselves. They protect old identities. They protect fears about the future and regrets about the past. They believe that every disturbance inside the mind changes the deepest truth of who they are. Yet awareness is like the moon. Thoughts are like the moving water. The reflection may tremble, but the moon remains untouched. The traveler felt a quiet sadness because he realized how often he had mistaken the reflection for reality. When someone praised him, he believed he had become more valuable. When someone rejected him, he believed he had become less worthy. When success arrived, he thought it would last forever. When disappointment arrived, he feared it would never leave. His life had been shaped by changing reflections, and he had rarely looked beyond them. The monk began walking along the edge of the stream, and the traveler followed. After a few moments, they reached a field where tall grass moved gently in the night wind. The monk asked him to watch the grass carefully. Every blade bent when the wind touched it, yet none of them argued with the breeze. They did not ask why the wind had come. They did not wonder whether it would return tomorrow. They simply moved with the moment that was already here. The monk said that human beings often believe strength means never bending, but nature teaches a quieter lesson. The tree that refuses to move may break in the storm, while the grass that bows with the wind rises again when the sky becomes clear. There are moments in life that cannot be controlled. Seasons change, people leave, children grow older, hair turns grey, dreams transform into something unexpected. The heart suffers most when it demands that movement stop. The traveler remembered how he had tried to hold on to every chapter of his life. He had wanted friendships to remain exactly as they were. He had wanted joyful days to last forever. He had wanted painful moments to vanish immediately. In trying to command the rhythm of life, he had forgotten that life itself is a river, never a stone. The monk picked up a small lantern and lit it. The soft light surrounded them, but beyond that small circle the night remained vast and mysterious. The monk asked if the lantern was a failure because it could not brighten the entire valley. The traveler smiled and said that it was not. The lantern gave enough light for the next step, and that was enough. The monk looked at him kindly and said that wisdom works in the same way. Many people refuse the small light because they cannot see the entire road. They want complete certainty before they trust, complete understanding before they forgive, complete confidence before they begin again. Yet life rarely offers the whole journey at once. It offers one step, one breath, one sunrise, one quiet chance to begin again. The traveler looked at the lantern and realized that he had spent years waiting for every answer. He had postponed peace until he understood every mystery. He had postponed gratitude until every problem disappeared. He had postponed rest until he believed he deserved it. The old monk stopped walking and sat upon a smooth stone. He invited the traveler to do the same. They watched the stars in silence until the monk spoke again. He said that there is a hidden habit inside the human mind. It quietly whispers that if we worry enough, we can prevent sorrow. If we prepare for every danger, nothing painful will happen. But worry is often like sitting beside a dark road, carrying a lantern and believing that holding it tighter will make the sun rise sooner. The traveler lowered his eyes because he knew those words were true. He had mistaken constant thinking for wisdom. He had mistaken endless planning for safety. The monk gently placed the lantern on the ground between them. Its light rested peacefully without effort. The old man said that the lantern shines because it follows its nature, not because it struggles. The stars shine without striving. The river flows without forcing. The moon reflects without asking to be admired. Perhaps the heart also has a quiet nature that has been hidden beneath years of fear and hurry. Perhaps beneath every anxious thought there is a simple wish to love and to be loved. Beneath every restless night there is a longing to feel safe. Beneath every regret there is a hope that life still has room for healing. The traveler closed his eyes and listened to the valley around him. The wind moved through the grass. The stream continued its endless song. The lantern flickered softly. He noticed that the world was not asking him to carry it. The stars remained in the sky without his help. The river found its way without his guidance. The night unfolded without his control. For the first time he wondered if he could allow his own heart the same freedom. He wondered if he could let memories come and go like the wind, let emotions rise and fall like the water, and let awareness remain as steady as the moon above the valley. Sitting there beneath the quiet sky, he understood that peace was never hiding in some distant future. It was waiting in the simple courage to stop chasing reflections and to trust the gentle light that had always been enough for the next step. Before the night gave way to morning, the old monk invited the traveler to climb a narrow trail that led to the highest hill overlooking the valley. The path was quiet, and the air carried the fresh scent of pine trees and damp earth. They walked slowly, not because the climb was difficult, but because there was no reason to hurry. The traveler noticed that every few steps the old monk would stop and simply look around. Sometimes he looked at the distant mountains. Sometimes he watched a bird gliding through the sky. Sometimes he looked at nothing the traveler could understand. At last the traveler asked why they were moving so slowly. The old monk smiled and asked a question in return. He asked whether the sunrise would arrive any sooner if they rushed to meet it. The traveler laughed softly and admitted that it would not. The monk nodded and said that many people spend their entire lives running toward moments that can only arrive in their own time. They hurry toward happiness. They hurry toward success. They hurry toward healing. They hurry toward peace. Yet the heart is not a machine that can be forced to work faster. A flower does not open because someone pulls at its petals. A seed does not become a tree because someone grows impatient. There is a quiet rhythm beneath all living things, and wisdom often begins when we stop fighting that rhythm. As they continued climbing, the traveler remembered all the seasons of his life that he had tried to escape. He remembered wishing childhood would end more quickly. He remembered wishing difficult years would disappear overnight. He remembered waiting for a future where everything would finally make sense. Looking back, he realized that while he had been chasing tomorrow, many quiet gifts had passed unnoticed. There had been simple mornings, shared laughter, gentle conversations, peaceful walks, and countless ordinary moments that had quietly carried the happiness he thought was somewhere else. The old monk seemed to understand what was happening inside him. He stopped beside a large stone and asked the traveler to sit. The eastern sky was beginning to brighten, though the sun itself had not yet appeared. The monk picked up a single pine cone that had fallen nearby and placed it in the traveler's hand. He asked what the pine cone contained. The traveler answered that it contained seeds. The monk nodded and said that hidden inside those small seeds were forests that did not yet exist. There were trees that would shelter birds, branches that would sway in the wind, and roots that would drink from streams not yet reached. Yet none of that could happen in a single day. The pine cone was not troubled by this. It did not compare itself to the ancient trees surrounding it. It did not fear that it was too small. It simply carried its nature quietly until the right season arrived. The monk looked toward the horizon and said that human beings often forget they are growing in the same way. They compare their beginning to someone else's middle. They compare their hidden struggles to another person's visible success. They believe they should already know what only time can teach. The traveler lowered his eyes because he recognized that habit in himself. He had measured his life against lives he did not truly understand. He had looked at strangers and imagined they carried no sorrow. He had looked at old friends and assumed they had found answers that escaped him. In doing so, he had quietly planted dissatisfaction in every season of his own journey. The monk then asked him to look at the sky. The first colors of dawn had begun to spread across the clouds. Some parts of the horizon were bright gold. Other parts remained deep blue. A few stars were still visible. The monk asked which part of the sky was correct. The traveler smiled and said that all of it belonged to the same morning. The monk nodded and said that the heart is much the same. Joy and sadness may exist together. Gratitude and uncertainty may exist together. Hope and fear may exist together. Human beings often create suffering because they believe they must wait until every dark cloud disappears before they are allowed to feel peace. Yet the dawn never waits for the last star to vanish. It simply arrives. The traveler sat quietly with those words. He thought about the nights he had spent fighting himself because he still carried doubt. He thought about the moments he refused to celebrate because life was not perfect. He realized that he had denied himself countless quiet blessings because he believed they had to be complete before they could be real. The old monk gently brushed a few fallen needles from the stone and continued speaking. He said that the mind has a strange habit of standing at the edge of a garden while staring only at the weeds. It notices what is missing before it notices what is present. It notices what is broken before it notices what is whole. It notices what might go wrong before it notices what is already good. This habit is not proof that the heart is flawed. It is simply an old survival instinct that forgets life is more than survival. Awareness gently teaches another way. It invites us to notice the open sky as well as the passing storm. It invites us to notice the warm cup in our hands, the breath in our lungs, the friend who stayed, the lesson hidden inside the disappointment, the quiet strength that has carried us through every difficult season. The traveler closed his eyes and listened. The valley below was waking. Birds were beginning their morning songs. The stream that had guided so many of the old monk's lessons continued to flow with the same patient voice. He understood that the river had never hurried toward the sea, and yet it had never failed to arrive. Perhaps a human life could be trusted in the same way. Perhaps healing was not a destination waiting somewhere beyond the next mountain. Perhaps it was already happening each time a burden was gently set down, each time a thought was allowed to pass, each time a weary heart chose kindness instead of judgment. At that very moment the sun rose above the horizon, filling the valley with light. The old monk did not point toward it or explain its meaning. He simply watched. The traveler watched as well, and in that quiet silence he discovered that the world had not been asking him to become someone new. It had only been asking him to stop turning away from the simple truth that every dawn, no matter how slowly it arrives, carries enough light to begin again. After the sun had fully risen, the old monk and the traveler remained on the hill for a while, watching the valley slowly awaken. Smoke began to rise from distant homes. Birds crossed the open sky in quiet patterns that seemed to need no map. The stream below continued to wind through the fields exactly as it had the day before, and exactly as it would long after both of them were gone. The traveler felt a strange mixture of gratitude and sadness, because he realized that the world had never stopped moving, even during the years when he believed his own life had become trapped. The old monk looked toward the river and asked him another simple question. He asked whether the stream ever carried the same water twice. The traveler answered that it did not. Every moment the current changed. The monk smiled and said that the human heart often forgets this truth. It believes that because a painful thought has returned, nothing has changed. It believes that because an old memory visits again, healing has failed. Yet no thought ever returns exactly the same way. No memory is experienced by exactly the same person. Time quietly transforms everything it touches, including the one who remembers. The traveler sat with those words and thought about the fears that had followed him for years. He remembered nights when he believed his loneliness would never end. He remembered seasons when he believed disappointment would always define him. Looking back, he saw that those moments had changed him, but they had not imprisoned him. He had continued walking even when he thought he could not. He had continued breathing even when his heart felt heavy. He had continued hoping even when hope seemed small. The old monk reached down and picked up a fallen branch that had been carried to the hill by an old storm. One side of the branch was rough and weathered. The other side had been polished smooth by years of rain and wind. The monk handed it to the traveler and asked which side told the true story of the branch. The traveler looked carefully before answering that both sides were true. The monk nodded. Then he said that many people show kindness to the polished parts of themselves while hiding everything that has been shaped by hardship. They believe that peace belongs only to the perfect version of who they wanted to become. Yet wisdom often grows from the places where life was difficult. A tree does not hide the rings that reveal long winters and dry summers. A mountain does not hide the marks left by wind and time. Nature carries its history without shame. Perhaps the human heart can learn to do the same. The traveler realized that he had spent years trying to erase parts of his own story. He wished certain failures had never happened. He wished some goodbyes had never been spoken. He wished he could return to earlier moments and become someone wiser. The old monk gently placed the branch on the ground and said that there is a hidden burden many people carry. They believe they must become different before they are worthy of peace. They promise themselves that they will rest after they become stronger, calmer, more successful, or more certain. But life has a quiet habit of creating another challenge as soon as the last one fades. If peace depends upon perfection, then peace remains forever out of reach. They began walking back toward the monastery, and the path led them through a meadow covered with wildflowers. Some blossoms had only begun to open. Others were already fading beneath the morning sun. The monk asked the traveler if the older flowers had somehow failed because their season was ending. The traveler smiled and shook his head. Every flower had simply lived according to its own time. The monk said that people often judge themselves by impossible seasons. They expect themselves to bloom every day. They forget that rest is part of nature. Silence is part of music. Winter is part of the forest. Even the fields that feed entire villages must sometimes remain empty so the earth can recover its strength. The traveler thought about all the times he had called himself lazy for needing rest, weak for feeling sadness, or lost for not having every answer. He began to wonder how different life might feel if he treated himself with the same patience he offered to the changing seasons. When they reached the stream once more, the old monk knelt beside the water and allowed his hand to rest just above the surface. He said that many people stand beside the river of life carrying a small cup. They spend every day trying to catch the entire current. They want to hold every beautiful moment, prevent every painful moment, and understand every mystery. But the river cannot fit inside the cup. The attempt itself creates exhaustion. The wiser path is to drink what is here, appreciate what is here, and allow the current to continue its journey. The traveler looked into the moving water and saw his own reflection. It was not perfectly clear. Small ripples crossed the surface, and sunlight danced across it. Yet for the first time, he did not wish the reflection would become flawless. He understood that the moving water was not hiding the truth. The movement was part of the truth. The old monk stood and looked toward the open sky. He said that awareness is not something that must be built from the beginning. It is something that has quietly remained with us through every changing season. It watched childhood become adulthood. It watched happiness arrive and leave. It watched grief soften. It watched hope return after nights that seemed endless. Like the sky above the valley, it has room for clouds without fearing that the blue will disappear forever. The traveler closed his eyes and took a slow breath. The air felt cool against his face. The sound of the stream felt familiar now, almost like the voice of an old friend. He realized that nothing around him was asking him to carry yesterday into tomorrow. The trees were not holding on to last autumn's leaves. The river was not turning back toward the mountain. The morning was not trying to become the night that had already passed. Everything moved forward with a quiet trust that life itself was enough. Standing there beside the old monk, the traveler understood that perhaps the deepest form of wisdom is not found by controlling the current, but by learning that the heart was never meant to hold the whole river, only this one breath, this one step, and this one gentle moment that has already been placed into our hands. As evening returned to the valley, the traveler realized that his journey had changed in a way he had not expected. When he first arrived, he had believed that wisdom would be a collection of answers. He imagined that the old monk would reveal a hidden truth that would erase confusion forever. Instead, every lesson had quietly removed something unnecessary. One burden after another had been set down. One old belief after another had become lighter. Yet there was one weight that still remained, though he had not spoken of it. It was the quiet habit of judging himself. As they walked back toward the monastery, the traveler finally confessed that he could forgive strangers more easily than he could forgive himself. He said that old mistakes still followed him. There were moments from years ago that returned without warning. Sometimes they came while he was working. Sometimes they came while he was walking alone. Sometimes they came just before sleep. He had learned not to chase those memories, but he still carried the feeling that he should have been wiser, kinder, stronger, or more careful. The old monk listened without interruption. Then he led the traveler to a small garden behind the monastery where a single apple tree stood beside an old stone wall. The branches were filled with leaves, but beneath the tree the ground was covered with fruit that had already fallen. Some apples were fresh. Some had become part of the earth. The monk picked one from the ground and held it in his hand. He asked the traveler if the tree had failed because it could not keep every apple forever. The traveler answered that it had not. The fruit had served its season, and the tree had simply continued growing. The monk nodded and said that human beings often demand something from themselves that they would never demand from nature. They expect themselves to hold on to every success while never making a mistake. They expect every season of life to be perfect. They expect yesterday's version of themselves to possess the wisdom that only tomorrow could bring. The traveler looked at the old apple tree and thought about the years that had passed. He remembered decisions that had not worked out the way he had hoped. He remembered words he wished he had spoken and words he wished he had left unsaid. He remembered times when fear had made him turn away from opportunities and times when pride had made him hold on too tightly. The old monk placed the fallen apple back upon the earth and said that many people confuse regret with responsibility. Responsibility helps us learn. Regret often asks us to relive the same moment forever. Responsibility plants a seed for tomorrow. Regret keeps digging up the garden to see whether the seed has already grown. The traveler had never heard it explained that way. He realized that he had spent years trying to become a better person by punishing himself. Somewhere inside, he had believed that if he carried enough guilt, he could somehow repay the past. Yet the past had never changed. Only his present moments had become heavier. The old monk slowly walked toward the stone wall and touched its weathered surface. He asked the traveler how the wall had become so smooth. The traveler answered that many years of wind and rain had shaped it. The monk smiled and said that kindness works much the same way. A single gentle thought may not seem powerful. A single act of patience may seem too small. But over time, they shape the heart in the same way that rain shapes stone. The traveler lowered his eyes because he had always believed that change must happen through force. He had pushed himself, criticized himself, and compared himself to others. He had rarely offered himself the simple kindness he would have given to someone he loved. The monk invited him to sit beneath the apple tree. The evening breeze moved softly through the branches, and a few leaves drifted down around them. The monk asked him to imagine that a dear friend had come seeking comfort after making a mistake. Would he call that friend worthless? Would he say that one failure erased a lifetime of goodness? Would he demand that friend carry the burden forever? The traveler answered quietly that he would never do such a thing. The monk looked at him with gentle eyes and asked why his own heart deserved less compassion than a stranger. The question settled over the garden like the evening light. The traveler had no answer because he had never truly asked himself that before. The old monk said that many hearts remain restless not because they have forgotten how to love others, but because they have forgotten how to include themselves in that love. They become generous toward the world while remaining harsh toward the person who needs kindness most. Yet a lamp that is never cared for cannot continue giving light. A garden that receives no water cannot remain green. The heart also needs moments of quiet mercy. The traveler watched another leaf fall from the tree and land softly upon the grass. It did not resist the earth. It did not cling to the branch. It simply accepted the season that had arrived. The monk pointed toward the leaf and said that there comes a time when every soul must stop carrying old versions of itself. The fearful child, the uncertain young traveler, the person who made mistakes, the one who did not know enough, the one who tried and failed, all of them deserve gratitude because they walked as far as they could with the understanding they had. They do not need to be abandoned, but they no longer need to be punished. The stars slowly appeared above the monastery, and the garden grew quiet. The traveler closed his eyes and felt the cool evening air. He realized that the old lessons about the river, the lantern, the moon, and the tree had all been leading toward this moment. Awareness watches without hatred. Nature grows without shame. The seasons change without apology. Perhaps the human heart was never meant to become peaceful by winning a battle against itself. Perhaps it was meant to become peaceful by laying down its own judgment and discovering that compassion is not a reward earned after a perfect life, but a gift that can be offered in this very breath. Sitting beneath the old apple tree, with fallen leaves resting quietly upon the earth, the traveler understood that healing does not ask us to become someone else. It gently asks us to welcome the person who has been walking beside us all along and finally allow that weary soul to come home. The days passed quietly at the monastery, and the traveler slowly discovered that the deepest lessons were often hidden inside the simplest moments. No grand ceremonies took place. No mysterious signs appeared in the sky. There was only the steady rhythm of ordinary life. The old monk swept the stone paths each morning. He watered the small garden behind the monastery. He sat beside the stream when the evening came. The traveler watched these small acts and wondered why someone who understood so much seemed to live with such simplicity. One evening, as the sun disappeared behind the mountains and the first stars began to appear, he finally asked the old monk what practice had brought him such peace. The monk smiled, but did not answer immediately. Instead, he invited the traveler to walk with him one last time to the stream that had quietly become part of every lesson. The water moved through the valley with the same calm voice it had carried since the traveler first arrived. The old monk sat upon a smooth stone and looked at the current for a long while. At last he reached down and placed a small wooden bowl into the water. The bowl floated gently, rising and falling with the movement of the stream. It did not resist the current. It did not fight the small waves that touched its sides. It simply allowed itself to be carried. The monk asked the traveler what would happen if someone tied the bowl to a heavy rock at the bottom of the stream. The traveler answered that it would no longer float. The monk nodded and said that many hearts are like that bowl. They were created to move with life, yet they become tied to old fears, old identities, and old stories. The current continues to carry everything forward, but the heart remains fixed to a place that no longer exists. The traveler looked into the water and realized that he had spent many years anchored to moments that had already passed. Some were beautiful memories that he feared losing. Some were painful memories that he could not release. He had built invisible ropes from expectations, disappointments, and regrets, never realizing that he had tied them to his own heart. The old monk reached into the stream and gently lifted the floating bowl back into his hands. He turned it upside down, and the water that had gathered inside quietly spilled back into the river. The monk said that there is another hidden burden many people carry. They believe they must keep every experience inside themselves. They collect praise and criticism, joy and sorrow, victories and failures. Their hearts become like bowls that are never emptied, yet nature offers a different lesson. The clouds release their rain, the trees release their leaves, the rivers release their water into the sea. Nothing grows by holding everything forever. The traveler remembered all the things he had refused to release. He remembered conversations that had ended years before, but still lived inside his thoughts. He remembered dreams that belonged to another season of life. He remembered old versions of himself that he continued trying to protect. The monk looked toward the darkening sky and asked him if he had ever noticed that the stars become visible only after the daylight lets go. The traveler smiled because he had never thought of it that way. The old monk continued and said that some beautiful things appear only when we stop clinging to what came before. New understanding arrives when old certainty is released. New peace arrives when old struggles are no longer fed. New hope arrives when the heart creates space for it. They remained silent as the moon slowly rose above the valley. Its reflection rested upon the stream, calm and bright. The traveler suddenly remembered the lesson of the moon and the water. The reflection could tremble, but the moon itself remained untouched. The old monk seemed pleased that the memory had returned. He said that many people spend their whole lives trying to make the water perfectly still. They wait for the day when no fear appears, no sadness returns, and no uncertainty remains. But perhaps the wiser path is simply to remember the moon. Awareness does not disappear because the mind is moving. Peace does not disappear because a difficult thought arrives. The deeper part of the heart remains whole even when passing feelings create ripples upon the surface. The traveler asked what he should do when old worries return after leaving the monastery. The old monk picked up a single pebble and tossed it gently into the stream. Small circles spread across the water and then slowly faded into the current. The monk said that thoughts are often like those circles. They appear because life is moving. There is no need to fear them. There is no need to chase them. If they are left alone, they naturally become part of the larger river. But when the mind keeps throwing new stones into the water, the surface never has a chance to rest. The traveler understood that much of his suffering had not come from the first thought, but from everything he added afterward. One small fear became 10 imagined futures. One old memory became an entire night of regret. One uncertain moment became a story about the rest of his life. The old monk gently placed his hand upon the wooden bowl and said that the practice is not to become someone who never thinks. The practice is to become someone who knows when to stop adding more stones to the stream. The night grew deeper, and the sounds of the valley became softer. The traveler noticed that he no longer felt the urgent need to understand everything. He did not need to know exactly what tomorrow would bring. He did not need to solve every unanswered question before sleep. Sitting beside the stream, he realized that life itself had been teaching him all along. The river never begged the mountain to remain. The moon never demanded that the clouds disappear. The trees never asked the leaves to stay forever. Everything belonged to the quiet rhythm of arriving and leaving. The old monk looked at the traveler one final time and said that perhaps the heart was never meant to become peaceful by controlling the flow of life. Perhaps it becomes peaceful by remembering that it was built to float, not to sink beneath the weight of everything it has ever carried. The traveler watched the wooden bowl resting beside the stream and understood that nothing had been missing from his life except the willingness to loosen the ropes that he himself had tied. In that quiet valley beneath the stars, with the river moving endlessly toward the unseen sea, he felt that the heart does not lose itself by letting go. It finally remembers the gentle freedom that had always been waiting beneath the weight of holding on. The final evening arrived so quietly that the traveler almost did not notice it. The valley was wrapped in the gentle colors of dusk, and the familiar stream continued its endless journey through the fields as though it had never known the difference between beginnings and endings. The old monk and the traveler walked together one last time along the stone path, passing the ancient tree, the small garden, and the places where so many simple lessons had unfolded. Nothing looked extraordinary, and perhaps that was the greatest lesson of all. Peace had not appeared through miracles. It had been waiting inside ordinary moments that the restless mind had once overlooked. The traveler stopped beside the stream and looked into the moving water. He remembered the leaf that floated without fear, the lantern that gave only enough light for the next step, the moon that remained untouched by the trembling reflection, the tree that welcomed every bird without becoming any of them, the wooden bowl that had been made to float instead of sink, and the old apple tree that never regretted the fruit it had already released to the earth. At first, those had seemed like separate stories, but now he saw that they had always been one story. They had all been pointing toward the same quiet truth. Life does not ask the heart to carry everything. Life gently teaches the heart to trust. The old monk sat upon the same smooth stone where they had shared so many conversations. He looked toward the sky where the first stars were beginning to appear. Then he asked the traveler whether he had found what he came looking for. The traveler remained silent for a long time because he realized that the answer was not simple. He had arrived believing that peace would feel like the complete absence of fear. He had imagined that wisdom would erase uncertainty forever. He had hoped that one final lesson would make his mind perfectly still. But now he understood something different. The fears had not disappeared. The questions had not all been answered. The future was still unknown. Yet his heart no longer felt trapped by those things. He had discovered that there was a place inside him wider than every fear, quieter than every memory, and stronger than every changing season. The old monk smiled softly, because he seemed to understand without hearing the answer spoken aloud. He reached toward the stream and let a few drops of water fall through his fingers. The tiny circles spread across the surface and slowly faded into the current. The monk said that many people believe they must hold on to every lesson forever. They become afraid of forgetting. They become afraid that one difficult day will erase years of understanding. But wisdom is not a stone that must be carried. Wisdom is more like the river. It continues to flow even when we are not watching it. It returns each time we become quiet enough to listen. The traveler looked around the valley one last time. The mountains stood peacefully beneath the darkening sky. The trees moved gently in the evening wind. The stars continued appearing one by one without hurry. Nothing in the world seemed to be struggling to become something else. The river was not trying to become the mountain. The mountain was not trying to become the stars. The moon did not ask the clouds for permission to shine. Everything rested naturally within its own place. The traveler realized that much of his suffering had come from believing that he should always be somewhere other than where he was. He should already have healed. He should already have understood. He should already have become the person he imagined. In chasing another version of himself, he had forgotten to meet the person who had quietly walked beside him through every season of life. The old monk gently placed a hand upon the traveler's shoulder and said that every human being carries two homes. One is built from places, people, memories, and changing circumstances. The other is built from awareness itself. The first home will always change because life changes. Friends come and go. Children grow older. The body grows older. The seasons turn. But the second home has always been waiting inside the quiet space that notices every breath. When the storms of life arrive, the heart may rest there. When joy arrives, the heart may rest there. When sadness arrives, the heart may rest there. Nothing has to be rejected, and nothing has to be chased away. The traveller closed his eyes and listened to the sounds that had become so familiar. The stream was still singing its patient song. The wind was moving through the leaves. Somewhere in the distance, a night bird called into the darkness. He noticed that the world was complete without asking anything from him. He did not need to control the river. He did not need to hold the stars in the sky. He did not need to solve tomorrow before tomorrow came. For the first time in many years, he felt that he could simply belong to this moment. The old monk stood and began walking back toward the monastery. The traveller followed, but after a few steps he turned and looked once more at the valley. He understood that one day he would leave this place. He would return to roads filled with uncertainty, to ordinary responsibilities, to moments of joy and moments of difficulty. Old thoughts would visit again. Old memories might return without warning. There would be nights when the heart felt heavy and mornings when the future seemed unclear. But now he knew that those things did not have to become prisons. They could come and go like clouds across the open sky. They could move through the mind like leaves upon the stream. They could rise and fall like the seasons that never ask permission to change. The path back to peace would not be hidden because it had never been somewhere far away. It would begin with one quiet breath, one gentle moment of noticing, one act of kindness toward himself, one willingness to put down a stone that no longer needed to be carried. As the stars filled the sky and the monastery lights grew warm in the distance, the traveller felt gratitude for every lesson that had unfolded in silence. He understood that the heart does not become free by escaping life. It becomes free by no longer resisting the life that is already here. And if, on some future night, old worries should return, and the mind should begin wandering once more, perhaps that will be all right as well, because the river will still be flowing, the moon will still be shining beyond the moving water, and the quiet home within will still be waiting with infinite patience, gently reminding every weary soul that nothing needs to be conquered tonight. Nothing needs to be perfect tonight, and that for this one peaceful moment, it is enough to breathe, enough to let go, and enough to simply rest.